Hi, I'm Celeste Raver, the Director of Influencer Development in the Stockdale Center. And I'm sitting here with Dr. Joe Thomas, the Director of the Stockdale Center. And we want to talk a little bit about the Influence the Influencer initiative here at the Naval Academy. And so the best way to start is actually to understand the history of the Influence the Influencer program. And Dr. Joe Thomas is a great person to ask that question to. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of the program?
Sure. I think the Naval Academy has been thinking for an awfully long time about how to develop its staff, faculty, coaches for their task. And I'm not referring now simply to the specific role that they play here, soccer coach, chemistry professor, what have you, but rather the bigger picture of the very purpose of the Naval Academy to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, physically, for very specific roles as leaders. So that conversation about how to think of the key influencers around here as the developers of leaders themselves, I'm sure goes back a long, long time. But in the context of the Stockdale Center, the first time these ideas were formalized, the real strategy took shape, was in about the 2012 timeframe. And working hand in hand with our colleagues in Leadership Education Development Division, the idea first looked like, from a strategic perspective, strategy, of course, is typically defined as ends, ways, and means for accomplishing something. The ends we looked at were to build better leaders, right? So leaders building leaders was the catchphrase used in almost every document between 2012 and 2015. And it was in that span, in those years, that we started to flesh out ideas in regard to the ways of doing that. And it ranged everything from building opportunities for conversations between the different pockets of expertise around here, the faculty, the coaches, the staff that works in Bancroft Hall, and so on. That was a big part of the objective of this. There were ways to do that by introducing all of these professionals to the fleet, to what everybody else is doing around here. Outsourcing leader development was a big part of that. We were sending people to Harvard and to Northwestern and to the University of North Carolina, the Center for Creative Leadership, and so on, to enhance competencies in regard to leadership itself, and a variety of other things. But if that's the ends and the ways that were envisioned, the means were critical. And by 2015, we were really fortunate because this is kind of a margin of excellence project, undertaking. We had to pursue the gift funds to be able to do that. And we were really, really fortunate. Two long-term, very generous donors to the Naval Academy were convinced that this is a great way to have an impact. And Tim and Susan Sullivan were the starting point. They enabled us to hire someone to oversee this effort in 2015, and we eventually hired that first director, the Tim and Susan Sullivan director of influencer development in July of 2016. And another long-term supporter of the Naval Academy named Dr. Ernst Volgino. He provided the programming dollars and support to do all of those things that we were envisioning as important. So starting in July of 2016, those programs got underway. We kind of moved this forward. It evolved over time, and we kind of landed where we are right now. We were really, really fortunate in 2021, late 2021, in looking out there and what the next evolutionary steps of this thing ought to be. We were able to land someone with a great deal of with research expertise that would not only manage programs and kind of drive the future direction of these programs, but the real holy grail in leader development everywhere and in every setting, of course, is the ability to measure return on investment of those interventions, right? So if I could reach my back, I'd pat ourselves on the back in this case, because we landed one Dr. Celeste Raver, who had a great deal of research experience and chops, even specific here to the Naval Academy in lead division down the hall, to be able to pick up the ball and start moving that vision, that strategy forward. So on that point, let me turn the tables then, Celeste. Since you've been at this since January of 2022, why don't you tell us what we're doing right now, where it stands in regard to that strategy, ends, ways, and means, perhaps, and where you see this whole thing going into the future.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'd say it took about 12 months to kind of figure out what the patterns were and what the best approach was for really developing leadership developers, which is kind of the framework I've used for the Influencer programs. Because when we think of the faculty, staff, and coaches here at the Naval Academy, they're really developing our leaders. And one of the things I observed over those 12 months is while everybody at the Naval Academy sees their contribution to the mission and they see their role and how they're developing midshipmen mentally, morally, and physically, whether it's in the classroom, on the sports field, or even in Bancroft Hall, they may be not totally sure about the fundamentals of leadership. Now, they may have great leadership experience and great exposure, but there's some nuanced kind of academic components of leadership that are helpful to understand when we're developing future naval officers. So as I observed that, I thought about, well, what's the best way to kind of help everybody understand this kind of broad field of leadership, and then understand how to develop midshipmen as leaders, not just as academics or on the sports field. And so with that, over the past 2 years, or really the past 12 months, I'd say, we've spent a lot of time focusing on providing a variety of things, whether it's long-term programs for our faculty, staff, and coaches where they can take part in what's called our Stockdale Associate Fellows program, and they take part in the program for a year. They get to know a cohort of about 20 other faculty, staff, and coaches. They learn academic leadership curriculum tied with experiential opportunities that the midshipmen take part in. So they can understand how do they take this leadership concept and tie it with an experiential learning opportunity that they can then take within their own sphere of influence with midshipmen. Right. We've also decided, that's a great program, but there's times people can't necessarily commit for a whole year. And so we've gotten to the point where we're actually offering a lot of short-term programs. Faculty, staff, and coaches can pop into like an hour-long luncheon session or a short workshop that takes place over 2 days for about an hour and a half each day, and really dive deep into some of these topics like emotional intelligence or just the broad field of understanding how you define leadership and why that's important at a place where we're graduating leaders. And so that's kind of where we are currently. But the question, I think, is like where we're going. Right. And that's, I think, what's fun, is really to help everybody at the Naval Academy. So that's the programming, but help everybody at the Naval Academy understand their specific role, whether it's in the classroom, on the sports field, and the pieces of that role that tie to leadership development. And that's kind of a culture shift. Yeah. Not that everybody doesn't see their role in developing midshipmen mentally, morally, and physically, but they see their role in developing them mentally, morally, and physically as leaders for our nation. And
so I love that. I love that vision, that forward focus. You know, historically, in those very early years that I referenced before, the preponderance of attendees in this programming were drawn from the faculty, kind of traditional academic faculty. But that's not been the case over the course of the past couple of years. I mean, can you describe the types of folks who participate in that Associate Fellows program that you reference, or anything else for that matter?
Yeah, it's been a strategy, frankly, to focus on kind of the main pillars of the Naval Academy: faculty, staff, meaning those in Bancroft Hall, those that support all of us on the yard, whether it's at the mid-store or our transportation department, and our coaches on the sports field.
Because they all have touch time with midshipmen.
They all have touch time with midshipmen, or they contribute to the culture of the academy and fundamentally how we all see that we're contributing to this mission that we're trying to achieve. And so a lot of the programs are really targeting kind of bringing in a wide swath of individuals from all those kind of faculty, staff, and coach pillars. And one of the things that drives is great communication, right? Great cross collaboration, so that if you're in the classroom and you primarily interact with those in the classroom, you now are sitting next to somebody that's working with midshipmen on the sports field, in the rowing team. And so now you're starting to understand the lens of a coach, whereas before you were missing that lens.
So is it safe to say then one of the great outcomes associated with the Associate Fellows program and maybe influencer development in general is to have a more holistic understanding of the operations of the Naval Academy, how everybody contributes to the development of ethical leaders of character to serve the nation.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think it's really exciting when you watch, whether it's a short workshop or in this kind of longer term program like our Stockdale Associate Fellows, but you kind of see light bulbs go off where a faculty member will be looking at a coach and saying, wow, I didn't realize the pressure that was on you to ensure, balance midshipman time in the sport they're doing as well as in the classroom, and vice versa, where that coach can go, wow, I didn't realize how hard it is to be a professor, frankly, and how much pressure you have to not only teach midshipmen, but also perform at the top of your academic game.
So in addition to understanding, then, we're building empathy, I suppose, for all of the role players here at the Naval Academy across the board. That's pretty powerful. So with that in mind, is what they're getting from this, what they're taking back to the classroom or back to the playing fields. Could you give some examples of maybe some of the most impactful activities that they may take part in? Can you give us some examples of some of the just flat out most fun and rewarding things that we put on?
I would say probably the most impactful, we'll start there. I'll start with our Stockdale Associate Fellows program. One of the reasons is that's just the most long-term program that is offered through Influence the Influencer. And it gives about 20 faculty, staff, and coaches the opportunity every year to get to know one another and to take a deep dive into really critical leadership topics that are important for their own development as leaders as well as the development of midshipmen. But beyond that, because not everybody can commit to a whole year of time in a program like that, would be things where they get to do some experiential stuff. Our National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS, is one of the programs that really has a huge benefit because it gets faculty, staff, and coach away from the Naval Academy.
What does it look like? Because there's so much talk about NOLS around here. Midshipmen have been going to NOLS for many years now, and in recent years we've been sending staff, faculty, and coaches to these experiences. Where are they and what do they look like? You've done NOLS yourself.
Yes, I just did NOLS because I wanted to make sure it was a valuable program. And it's a cohort of 12 faculty, staff, and coaches. It's just Naval Academy group that goes at a time. We've done to the Canyonlands as well as to in Utah, and as well as to Alaska on a sea kayaking tour. And really what it looks like is the group goes out to whatever location they're going to go on. There's 3 NOLS instructors that go with them. They're divided in small groups throughout the week, and they rotate leadership roles. And so some that have perhaps served in multiple leadership roles find it easy, they think, but they soon learn that perhaps leading other military officers or enlisted sailors and Marines may look a little different than leading a group of peers that with very different backgrounds.
In a wilderness setting.
In a wilderness setting with a backpack when people are tired or hot or cold, depending on the location. And those that maybe haven't had as much kind of outside of the classroom leadership experience or off the sports field leadership experience also find challenges in that they have to find a different voice, perhaps. It's one voice in the classroom, it's another voice, again, with your peers, when you may not quite be as confident in some of the decisions you have to make.
It's a very demanding classroom.
Yes.
Alaska and the Canyonlands of Utah and so on. Now that's perhaps one of the more exotic things that are offered by the Influencer Development Program through the Associate Fellows. But I know you do a lot of things here on the yard as well. Can you describe those things here on the yard or maybe in the local area that have an impact and also help build that sense of network, cohort camaraderie and such?
I'd say I'll start with our workshops. So those are kind of short-term, usually 2-part workshop, about 3 hours in total. So not a huge investment, but usually we'll have 20 to about 30 people show up to a workshop. And the topics vary. We had one most recently on emotional intelligence and authentic leadership, and the overlap between the two. And the group got to participate in various tables focusing on we hear this word emotional intelligence, authentic leadership quite a bit. And people generally kind of understand what they are, but in the kind of leadership world or the field of leadership, there's a lot to them. They're very nuanced concepts. And so we spend time not teaching with a slideshow, but actually having people get their hands dirty.
So it's interactive.
It's interactive, participative, to understand, well, what does it mean to have empathy? How do you actually read somebody else's emotions so when you're giving them feedback, you can understand what's happening? And so we spend time breaking down those activities. And I'll say it's fun to watch because it definitely can be a little bit, that one in particular, a little bit out of people's comfort zone.
Yeah, sure.
But the feedback is phenomenal.
So they're picking up skills, important skills, to be better leaders themselves and to understand leader development better themselves. Are they also getting certifications, or what are the incentives for engaging in this program? Is it something to build the resume, not just simply build skills, but is there some formal recognition of this participation?
It depends on the program. So some of the internal programs are purely for self-development and the ability to better develop future naval officers as leaders. And other programs, there are certificates. So we have a workshop on crucial conversations, and that's a certificate program. We do our Stockdale Associate Fellows, they get a certificate from the Stockdale Center. We have a coaching program here, which is coaching for higher education leaders.
Right, we're not talking about athletics coaching now, we're talking about leadership coaching.
Yes, we're talking about leadership
executive
coaching.
style coaching.
Yeah, so it's leadership coaching, and it's to develop coaching skills for our Naval Academy faculty, staff, and coaches. So our company officers in Bancroft Hall, our senior enlisted, as well as our faculty and athletic coaches, and they get a certificate when they complete that program. And outside of here, we do send people to coaching programs at Georgetown, as well as doing additional programs. This is not necessarily a certificate program, but it's a fun, when you ask the question, like what the most fun programs we do. We do two awesome, I think, experiential programs off the yard, beyond Knowles, and that's the Professors at Sea program, and influence
at sea, as in a carrier, an actual haze gray and underway warship.
They go underway on an aircraft carrier for 2 to 3 days. They get to experience kind of the whole, kind of what it's like to be on an aircraft carrier. They get to see all the different departments and talk to the captain and really get to spend some time observing. A lot of times they'll bump into their own students, some of our faculty, and they'll be super excited to kind of see where they are and what they're going through. So that's a exciting program that's highly popular. The other one is Influencers in the Field, where we actually send a group down to Quantico, and they get to see what it's like to be second lieutenants. They stay in the barracks, and they get to do the Leaders Reaction course, and check out the E-course, and
so the endurance course, they're actually physically going through.
They're going through the endurance course.
So you better know what you're getting into then, I guess.
But it's modified. It's not timed, unless anybody wants that.
We're not breaking anybody here.
Nobody's getting broken.
It's
all fun, but get to see the armory and again run into potential past students, and that is probably the joy when you get to see a faculty member.
Well, context matters, right? So it's long been said, we're very unique. Service academies are unique in that we hire all of our own graduates for very specific roles as leaders in the Navy, Marine Corps, and aviators and submariners and Marines and SEALs and so on, to see that context. What's the type of feedback then that you get from folks who may never have been on a ship, in spite of the fact they perhaps could have been teaching here for many years, yet they were never on a warship or never in the field with Marines? What type of feedback are they giving you after experiencing things like that?
I think the most important is that they say, now I can better relate to my students in the classroom.
That's great.
And that's what we want, or in the sport that they're doing, because there's this kind of reality. I mean, we hear as civilians, you have this kind of general understanding of what the future looks like for for the midshipmen, but you don't necessarily understand that unless you get some of these sneak peeks. And that's really the feedback they come back with. Like, I have a better understanding of what my students are going to go do when they graduate from the Naval Academy, and then I can kind of embed it in the classroom.
That's great.
One of our mechanical engineering professors that went on Professors at Sea, she was of course fascinated with kind of all the kind of mechanical components and the engine room, and she loved it because she could come back to the classroom and talk about that kind of the engine room and how things are operating, and use it in the classroom.
Yeah.
So it's really got a wide variety of
that.
applications.
So most of everything that we've talked about here today has been focused on individual enhancement, right? The focus on the individual, how to make that individual better, more capable, more competent as someone who develops leaders. But I know you also do some work with organizations on the yard. So you're trying to also up the game of teams, departments, cost centers perhaps, and make them function better. Can you describe that part of your effort?
I'm really glad you asked this, because this is my own personal passion. It's where I've done a lot of my own academic research in the dynamics of culture and climate of organizations and teams. And so broadly, we do workshops on culture and climate focused for department chairs or focused for athletic coaches, where they can really understand what the difference between culture and climate, and then begin to diagnose it. So there's that broad workshop, but then we also do targeted stuff, such as for the company officers on better understanding, how do I recognize the results of my DEOC survey, and how do I take these results and then make the changes I need to change? Which
is essentially the federal government's climate survey.
Correct, yeah.
And a report card of sorts by which organizations across the Department of Defense are judged. Yeah. So we're helping them up their game on things that the larger Department of Defense finds important and interesting about what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's something. And how does that feedback, if you've got those tools to assess climate, as you had mentioned before, can you describe just an example of perhaps how we up the game, some of the activities that you do to up the game to actually improve that climate?
Well, I'll use, because this was a recent example, from the DEOC survey. We worked with our company officers and senior enlisted in Bancroft Hall on how do they recognize what climate is? What is climate? We hear this word. This is the challenge with a lot of these leadership concepts is we hear these words all the time, but we don't necessarily peel back the onion on what they mean. So we spent probably 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, just understanding what climate really is. And then putting it in the context of what's climate for their companies, and then giving them some kind of strategic, I think there were 7 steps they could take once they've recognized it, potential kind of areas to work on based on the climate of their company, what they then needed to do, perhaps by saying, well, what are the values we want for our company? What are the actions we need to achieve that value? And then what are the steps I will take as a company officer or senior enlisted to ensure these actions that achieve this value become part of what we're doing?
That's great. So there's a step-by-step process in place to make those improvements. That the need for improvements are identified in these survey instruments.
I think the thing is, and this is going kind of broadly, but one of the goals of ITI, going back to the beginning part of our conversation, is, again, these leadership concepts, we hear them all the time. Everybody's heard kind of climate and culture, at least in this type of environment, or we understand and hear the word leadership, but there's so much nuance to them. But if you get too philosophical for something like this, it can be hard to understand, well, what do I need to do? So one of my personal goals and strategies in the Influence the Influencer programs are to take these concepts that can be broadly understood, give a bit of more academic grounding to them, but then simplify what you need to do to change, whether it's personally change or change an organization.
The application phase is what you're focused on.
Absolutely, because otherwise nothing really gets done. We're learning, we may get a minute amount better, but we're not necessarily taking the bigger steps forward.
Remove the abstractions as best you can. Well, this is all great. I mean, I love everything that you said, the direction you're taking things. For folks who may tune in to this particular conversation and are thinking, is the Associate Fellows program for me, or perhaps if they're a leader of some organization on the Naval Academy, do I want to bring in this group conversation to address issues of climate or challenges in function of teams and organizations? What's the best way for them to access some of these resources and access some of this time?
I think number one is to check out our website. It's on the .edu under the Stockdale Center page, and they can look up Influence the Influencer there. It's got a breakdown of all our programs and what those programs look like.
So you have a menu in effect to choose from.
There's a great menu to choose from.
Great.
And the other thing is just to contact me, to reach out, send me a note, and I'm happy to sit down, grab a coffee, talk through the Influence the Influencer programs, whether it's more at an individual kind of understanding of what they are, or broadly for a department or team.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, so we even have a ways of grabbing this.
Absolutely.
So Dr. Celeste Raver, Director, Tim and Susan Sullivan, Director of Influencer Development at the Naval Academy within the Stockdale Center. Thanks. I mean,
thank you, Joe.
That's really, really a grand vision for how this goes, and congratulations on great work toward this end. So thanks to you, and thanks to everybody tuning into this.